Please welcome Mary Elizabeth Winstead. So I absolutely love this film, and I feel like it takes you 2 minutes to get into the character, which is very unusual. Usually they like to have kind of a slow build and a slow setup. What was the first moment when you were reading the script when it immediately grabbed you?
I think, like you said, from the first page, absolutely. In the script, it was a little bit different than as you see it in the film. It was really just like a 3-page stand-up act monologue in the script, just unedited, just going and going and going. And she was so bold and complex and funny and unapologetic and completely intriguing to me. And with every page, I just wanted to know more and more about her. So it was a really easy thing for me to get really excited about.
Yeah, and I love the complexity of this character. It comes across in a very real way. What were the elements of her that you immediately were drawn to and felt were incredibly authentic to real life?
Well, I'd always felt like I'd never really played a very angry character before, and that was, someone had asked me, not that long before I did the film, if there was one thing that I hadn't done yet or that I didn't think I was very good at, and I said I feel like I'm not that great at playing sort of rage. Like I always just kind of go into emotion and stuff, and so I hadn't really tapped into that yet. So I thought that was a really interesting opportunity for me because I wasn't really sure how to do that or how to play that, and that was something that was obviously really alive in her, that she was angry kind of at men and at the world and didn't give a fuck about it, and I kind of wanted to find that in myself and tap into that. And I also wanted to learn why she was carrying that. And of course, as the film goes on, you find that out.
Yeah. Have you had any interesting reactions to that anger and to that rage that she has because she displays it so fervently? And I feel like as women, we're kind of taught that we should keep that inside of ourselves a lot. So if there have been different reactions from men and women as well?
There have been. I think for the most part, people really appreciate it because it's not something we see that often. And so I think it is kind of refreshing. Certainly refreshing for me as an actor to get to play that, to not have to worry about being likable all the time or pleasing everybody all the time. This film was just one of those films where you're like, it's just not going to please everybody all the time. And that's okay. I'm really happy about that, actually. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely been some people who have mixed reactions to the film because they don't particularly like her brand of comedy or they don't particularly like her personality and the way she presents herself. And like I said, that's cool with me. I like her. I like it.
And obviously talking about the comedy is such a central heart of the film and it's so well done. What were some of the first conversations that you and the director Ava had in kind of shaping how that was going to be and what the tone of it was going to be?
Eva and I got together a lot before shooting the film and just kind of talked a lot about the character, a lot about the comedy. I was just so nervous about it, so I was constantly picking her brain about that and how she envisioned it and what she wanted to be and what her inspirations were. And we talked mostly about Lenny and Bob Fosse films and like all that jazz and kind of more going into that territory. And of course, still obviously thinking about great comedians and watching a lot of comedy and going to a lot of comedy shows and immersing ourselves in that world. But I think she really saw it more as a character study. And so we tried to make it more figure out who this person is and let her comedy and everything that comes in the movie come out of that.
Yeah. And did you have conversations as well? Because I feel like the final scene where we see her kind of revealing her backstory, it's so emotionally raw and so brilliantly portrayed. And did you approach that in a different way to the rest of the comedy scenes, and how did you build that out?
I guess I approached it in a slightly different way because the first time I read it out loud, I connected to it and it worked so well that I didn't really want to practice it or anything. Whereas all the other comedy bits, I was like, practice them all different ways. I did them for Eva, I did them for other actors, and it was like trying to figure out if it worked or not. Whereas that was like, it was just so honest and truthful in the way that Eva wrote it. That I just kind of wanted to let it be, and I think she felt that way too. I mean, we certainly talked a lot about it, and every now and then she would come to me and tell me a little something that happened to her or a little insight into her life that would bring something new to that scene for me. And so by the time we shot it, I was really full of this character and what she'd been through, and Eva and what she'd been through, and so it was just easy to just kind of get up on stage and just let it out.
It's also really great because she's a character who kind of knows who she is, but it shows that you can't control the trauma that you have. And she's not to fault for that whatsoever. It's like she's doing great professionally. How did you kind of work on gradually teasing that out in the character?
I think choosing to make her a stand-up comedian was an interesting choice because her comedy is sort of a vessel for where to kind of put her pain and also how to mask it. And I think that's something that comes to blows, the further and further we get in the film, and we see her doing better and better in her comedy and worse in her life. I think she realizes she's sort of at an impasse at a certain point where she can't go on stage and sort of give all of herself every night without really giving all of herself, and she can't give herself to her loved ones or to her audience or to anybody until she sort of reconciles this thing that's happened to her, and until she can dust off this horrible shame that she's been living with, and realize that she's still going to be okay once she comes out with it, and when she's truly honest, and that she's still going to be loved and she's still going to be accepted and all of those things. So I feel like I forgot where the question started, but that's my answer.
No, I love it. And I love that phrase that you just said about giving all of herself, because we literally see her vomiting against the wall continuously, which I also, in a weird way, respected, because it shows that sometimes the things that you enjoy the most can be the hardest things to do, because you're giving so much of yourself to it physically and emotionally. Have you kind of found any sidelines with that in your own career, and kind of how do you deal with that fear when you step onto a new set and you have to suddenly learn everyone's name and portray a completely different character 3 weeks from now?
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely relate to the nerves and the doubts and all of that I'm sure would go into most stand-up comedians' minds when they're about to get on that stage, and I feel that anytime I'm starting a project, and I definitely felt it on this one, maybe more so than anything. I just had a complete panic, about a week before we started, and I just thought, what am I doing? I don't know how to do this. I'm so scared. And I felt like I could relate that to Nina, the feelings that she must feel before she goes out. And then when she's out there, actually feeling really confident and in her element, and using her abilities and feeling really happy and kind of in control of herself in that moment, and then stepping off stage and being totally out of control again. So I could relate to that in my own way, and as in being in front of the camera as opposed to being on the comedy stage.
Even if we're not physically throwing up.
Yes.
This is also a very weird compliment. I feel like you play drunk incredibly well.
Thank you.
And you've had some practice when you were in Smashed.
Yes.
This was obviously very different to that. Yeah. But kind of, could you talk a little bit about the craft and kind of figuring out the right way to figure out what level of drunk is she going to be in this scene?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Smashed was a great training ground for me. I did a lot of drunk scenes in that movie, and had to really, basically the director of that film was like, this has to be authentic. He was like, this cannot seem fake, and so I knew I had to figure out how to do it right. And on that film, I did a few different things. I sort of took myself through some exercises that were almost like hypnotizing yourself, really thinking about drinking and what it feels like when the alcohol hits your tongue, and when it goes down your throat, and when you feel it in your stomach, and letting my eyes kind of glaze over while I thought about that. And then I had other tricks, like right before we started shooting, I would look down at the floor and run in circles, and because when I would stop and I would be in the scene, I would be trying to focus and be trying to be sober, which is really what it feels like when you're drunk. You're not trying to act drunk, you're trying to act like you've got it together. So that always really helped me if I was sort of out of it, trying to keep myself, from feeling that way.
That sounds like such a good trick. There's also a lot of physicality in the early scenes when you're in the relationship with Chace Crawford's character. Right. And I feel like that must involves such an implicit level of trust on screen. So how did the two of you work together to create those scenes where you weren't afraid to go there physically, but also you trusted that you weren't going to take it too far at any point?
Yeah, it's always a little bit of a dance. We had a stunt coordinator on that day, but that was also, he was great, but that was also a bit complicated because on the one hand, you don't want it to be too choreographed. So we're sort of choreograph it out, and then we're also trying to forget all of that and just do whatever feels right. So we both kind of had to have the moment where we look at each other and we were just like, we're going for it. Of course he wasn't really going to hit me. We had that part worked out, but when I'm hitting him back and it's scrappy and all that stuff's happening, I think we really trusted each other and we wanted it to feel real. So we made the parameters of what was safe, and then within that we just let it go.
And then on the flip side, you have the relationship with Common. And you guys just have such incredible chemistry on screen together. But again, he's newer to working in movies. You've been doing this since you were a kid. Kind of, do you have any sort of different approach when you're working with an actor who's a little bit newer to being on sets than you? Or is it just the same as when you first come onto set with any actor and figuring it out?
I mean, I guess the only real difference was maybe that he was more interested in rehearsing than I was. And that was something that we kind of compromised on a little bit, I guess. Like, we met up together, he and Eva and I, at his house, and kind of went over a few of the scenes, and we talked a lot about the script and about the characters and just ourselves, and we spent just an afternoon doing that. And I think once we started doing the scenes and they flowed really easily and they were really natural, I think all three of us were kind of like, okay, we feel good now. We don't have to beat this into the ground. Because I really think just for this particular movie and these scenes, it felt more right to me that we just do it when we got there. We're meeting each other in the scenes, we're getting to know each other in the scenes, and I thought it would be really nice to get to do that while the cameras were rolling.
Well, probably also because you have to take yourself to some very dark places, and I imagine that's very difficult to do repeatedly. You want to really just capture it on camera.
Absolutely, yeah. For these kinds of films, I'm definitely more of a let's wait for it to be real kind of mentality.
And it was also filmed incredibly fast. It was 21 days?
Yes, 21 days. Very fast.
What are some of the... Obviously, there's obvious challenges to shooting incredibly fast, but do you feel like there's some weird benefits in that you just have to go in and do it?
Yeah, I mean, I love it, actually. I've always loved shooting that fast because you just have no time to think. You're just totally in it, and you're in your body, and you're in your heart, and whatever it is that the character's feeling, and you don't have time to sit around and go, oh, should my hair be like in a ponytail, or should I, you're just doing it. So that I love, and it keeps the energy high. Nobody's like in and out of taking a nap or anything. So I just always really love that fast pace.
It's so great. I really enjoy the feminist undertone of this film as well, admittedly. And, it touches on that whole thing of there can only be one, which I think we all learned from Master of None. Was that something that felt important to you, or is it more about the character?
I mean, all of it was important to me. I mean, as I sort of mentioned, that most of the movie, other than the fact that Nina's a stand-up comedian, is based on our writer-director's real-life experiences. So in talking to her about that and like wanting to be a part of bringing her story out there and being a part of her voice being recognized was really important to me. And then everything else, I mean, the whole movie, it's, obviously there's the core story of her childhood abuse, but beyond that, there's her everyday abuse at her workplace in terms of her sexual harassment and just constantly being hit on to the point where she's just inundated with this male energy, and she tries to really own her sexuality and own her power, but she's constantly being attempted to be stripped away from her. So it's exhausting, and I think that's kind of something that we're all learning more and more that every woman deals with in some capacity. So yeah, it was important to me and refreshing to me to get to do something that spoke to that.
I also really enjoy the fact that I feel like so often when we have films where it's all about a stand-up comedian, male or female, that it's all about, I'm just trying to get booked for a free gig and maybe I'll get paid a 6-pack of beers at the end of the night. But this was really refreshing because she is actually successful at her career. And it's really that juxtaposition where you're good at something, you've gotten to that certain point, and you know that you're ready for that next step, and you're kind of waiting for someone to give you the opportunity, but also deciding what path you want your career to take. Were there similar trajectories from your own career path and the way that it's kind of shaped and crafted over the last few years that you were able to draw from?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I could definitely relate to someone kind of honing their skills over time and working to get somewhere, and then building their confidence in what they do, and also in like her audition for Comedy Prime and the way that all happens. The part of it where sometimes you have to accept certain things that aren't perfect, in order to move ahead. Like sometimes you end up playing a part that isn't ideal because the project overall is great, or you end up having to be up against women that you really like, and that feels weird, but you have to do it anyway. And so all of that rang really, really true to me.
We were also talking a little bit before about the impressions, which are just so spot on. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit with these guys about which ones were pre-prepared, how you kind of came up with them, where you drew them from.
Sure. I mean, in the script, the impressions were largely almost like created characters that Eva had written in, like Nina does an impression of her uncle, and there were a few other ones like celebrities that she had written in, but none of them were any that I felt like I would be super comfortable doing. So I just kind of made a list of people that I thought, I think maybe I can do a few of these people, and particularly the singers because I sing, and so I thought that might be a good jumping off point that I could maybe manipulate my voice a little bit. But most of them just came from things I've done like in the shower or with friends in conversation, or funny voices that I've done just by myself. So I certainly am not an impressionist by any means, but I've probably done all the ones that you've seen in the movie at some point or another just in life.
Did you get a chance to see the ones that the other comedians were going to do ahead of time as well?
I heard about them ahead of time, and we did have a day where we all got together and kind of talked about all of it and talked about what everybody was going to do, but I didn't really see them all until we shot that scene, and I was just like blown away. They were all so hilarious. And I loved the scene where you see one of the comedians who also does a Bjork impression. We just threw that at her on the day because Eva wanted something where we both do the same thing, and she was like, "Who can do a Bjork impression?" She was like, "I'll do it." It just was like she just pulled that out. It was amazing.
I even just randomly like the idea that someone else might do the same impression as you. Yeah. And in art, it's like someone else might play this role. They might also do this thing, but just finding your own true identity of who you want to be in that moment was really interesting. Yeah. I'm also just really curious because I feel like when I was reading a lot of interviews and watching stuff to prep for this, there's a lot of description of like, well, her character is great, it's really interesting, it's really complex, it's not likable. Yeah. And I'm like, I hate that we've come to this point where we're talking about this, but I think it's important because it's great that we're looking at women in these more complex and real ways in society. Is it something where you've kind of sought these roles out and you've made specific choices along the way of the scripts that you're going to say yes to? Or do you find that the more you do these roles, the more that they're kind of coming to you and finding you now?
I guess it's kind of a combination. I mean, and likable is such a weird term too, because it's like likable to who? Like, you know, we don't all find the same things likable, you know.
We're people.
Yeah, so it's it's always been a weird thing to me. Like we're all trying to please like one guy who has certain tastes or something. But yeah, I think over time I've honed in on what I think is interesting and compelling for me in terms of roles that I want to play. I think I've been very lucky that there's been people have taken notice of that and have in return offered me those kinds of roles. You know, it's sort of a very symbiotic kind of relationship, I guess, between my choices and the material that comes my way. And it's been, especially the past few years, there's been a nice kind of progression of that where it hasn't been like it was in my earlier days where I was like beating down doors to try and get the parts that I wanted. It's been a lucky few years.
Yeah. And I noticed you've taken producer credits on a couple of roles before. What was it that led to you wanting to have a little bit more creative involvement in those projects? And is it something that you're thinking about doing again, or is it more just very serendipitous with those?
I mean, I guess I have always approached acting from a kind of team playing sort of point of view. Like I always want what's best for the movie. And I always want to collaborate. And so I'm always sort of in it in that way. So it feels sort of natural, I think, for me to want to produce and I think I always only want to be the kind of producer that's like an ally for the director and just somebody to bounce ideas off creatively and that kind of thing. And so I'd love to do it again. At some point, maybe direct at some point, maybe. I'm not really sure, but do it. Yeah. I'll do it one of these days. But yeah, it just sort of feels natural to me. I'm not really I don't ever really come into things just thinking about my role. You know, I'm thinking about the whole story. So it's fun to get to have a hand in all of it.
That's how directors talk. When you're meeting with directors and casting directors and producers, what are some of the roles at this point in your career that they draw on when they're speaking about why they're excited to work with you?
I think you mentioned the movie Smash. That's one that has stuck really in people's minds, and so I feel really grateful for that. That's one that Eva Vivas, who made this film, saw, and why she thought of me for this part. And now Fargo seems to be a big one as well that people are referencing, and I'm being offered more unlikable characters as a result, which I'm welcoming. So I think those have been two sort of big shift moments for me, I think.
And then when you're in these meetings and you get to that point where someone says, we really want to cast you in this role, what are some of the questions that you like to ask personally about what the filmmaking process is going to be like on set, kind of who are the other actors or how the director is going to work with you?
You know, I like to talk about, I think, their perspective on the story and their emotional connection to it, and the character, of course, as well. And I like to talk about their references in terms of what inspires them, other artists that inspire them, other stories or films that inspire them. And also you just kind of get a feel for a person and the way they are with you, and if they're kind and open, and that's kind of ultimately what really goes a long way for me, what their perspective on the world seems to be. Yeah.
Do you ever try and talk to other actors who've worked with them as well, just to hear about what that experience was like?
Yeah, definitely sometimes. And usually I don't even have to. Like, I usually be like, I heard you might work with this person and you should know they're great. And so usually it comes without, invitation. It's like when somebody's great to work with, other people want to let you know, which is cool.
Yeah. Good references, calling them. You started incredibly young in filmmaking, which I hadn't realized quite how young. When you were 12 was your first paid acting gig. Do you remember that feeling when you first walked onto set, and like what was it that just really took you back about the filmmaking process that first day?
I loved it so much. I loved everything about it. Everyone was so nice to me, and there was free food everywhere. And like, it just was amazing because I loved to act so much, and I couldn't believe that you could do it and for a living, that somebody would pay you something to go and play pretend, and give you a nice place to sit and free pizza, It just was absolutely mind-blowing to me, and I just still feel that way. I'm still, so excited about it. And I can remember the day that I found out I was getting paid. I was just like so gobsmacked. So yeah, it's still kind of, in some ways it's a difficulty moving forward in some ways, of like asking for more money and like standing your ground when you just feel so thankful just to be there, So that's sort of, I think, a new kind of balance that I'm trying to struggle with, because that's still that little kid in me that's just like, I can't really believe I'm allowed to do this.
Like, thanks for letting me come.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself having more of those conversations, especially since I feel like a lot of actors have become more outspoken about pay disparity and finding out that they weren't paid according to their co-stars, not even specifically gender, but also just asking for what you actually deserve. Have you found that that's helped you on your side of the business as well?
It's been certainly eye-opening and interesting. A lot of my actor friends, we've been talking about it amongst ourselves, actresses, but then also actors, and both sides of it were unaware, and a lot of male actor friends that I have were like shocked at the disparity, and just, it's not something you ever talk about because it's always, it's deemed tacky to talk about how much you've been paid. So that's something, and I think we're struggling to figure out what to do about that, because we are still in this position where we all feel like it's hard to ask for more money when you really want to do something, and you're afraid they're gonna walk away from you, and you have to be brave enough to know that can happen, and that'll still be okay. So I think it's going to be an ongoing struggle, but I think the fact that the conversation has started amongst both genders is huge, and hopefully we can slowly start to figure out how to make that better.
Yeah, because it is all conversations going on behind closed doors. So with the film coming out, what are you hoping that people take away from your performance specifically, and from your character the most as they walk away from it?
I think I hope that either they relate to it, or that their eyes are opened by it in some way, that a woman like this character, who's seemingly so strong and seemingly sort of doesn't give a fuck about anything or anybody, is really struggling and is really going through something. And And I think a lot of women will be able to see themselves in that, and a lot of men will go, oh, wow, okay, I didn't realize, you know, and so that's the conversation that's happening everywhere at the moment. And so hopefully this will just be an added voice to that. And I think every voice is important. I really do. And I really hope that whoever needs to see this film will be able to see it.
Yeah. I also, in a slightly political tangent, suddenly realized it's really interesting that we're watching this and talking about this film today.
Today, I know. It's been really crazy for me because I've been in between interviews watching it on my phone, and you know, it's been kind of surreal in a lot of ways. We'll see what happens. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing character, and I think it's such a fantastic performance that you've given that really has an authenticity and a truthfulness to it that audiences seem to really be connecting with. So congratulations, and thank you so much to all of you for coming tonight.
Thank you.